Hi and welcome back to my channel. In this video I'm going to show you how I made this spinner card for the Lawn Fawnatics Little Things Challenge. The stamp set I'm using is S'more the Merrier. This one was just released in Lawn Fawn's new release, but this particular stamp set that I have came from the Lawn Fawn and Ellen Hudson collab. The first thing I do for this card is stamp out the little images that I'm going to use. In this case, I'm using the bag of marshmallows, the box of graham crackers, the little bar of chocolate, and I am going to also include the campfire. Off screen, I have stamped and colored multiples of the marshmallows, graham crackers, and chocolate. For the bag of marshmallows, I am using C0, C1, BG000, Y15, B04, G02, and R35. Now as I color these, you will notice that these colors that I picked are very similar, if not the same, as colors of specific brand products. I was not creative at all when I picked my colors, but it just so happens that the blues in the bag of marshmallows and the graham crackers, as well as the yellow in both of those, kind of worked together anyway, so I didn't have to incorporate too many crazy colors. For the bag itself, they're usually clear. I just decided I would add a little bit of shading with the C0 markers, and then I would give it a slight bluish tint with the BG marker. I thought about adding individual marshmallows on the inside, but I had to do so many bags and it's so small I just left it as is. For my box of graham crackers, I use Y13, Y15, Y17, B04, B06, and B28. For the label where it says graham crackers, those are going to be yellow, and then the rest of the box is going to be done in blue. For those of you in the US, can you tell which brands I was using as my inspiration? For the coloring on the box of graham crackers, I kept the darker colors towards the outer edges and left it lighter in the center. I did this for both the yellow and the blue part. For my chocolate bar, I used E59, E89, and E49. That will be for my wrapper on my chocolate bar. I also used C1, C3, and C5. That will be for the foil part of my wrapper. The chocolate bar has such small areas to color. 3 colors probably aren't really necessary. It's just what I'm used to using. I do not add a lot of the darker colors, as it would make the whole wrapper or bar of chocolate look much darker than I wanted it to. For the chocolate itself, I use E27, E29, and E49. As I finished coloring the bar of chocolate, I do wish that I had made the chocolate a little bit lighter. It was a bit darker than I had intended, but this is one of those issues where, because I'm using 3 colors instead of 2, and it's such a small area, the dark kind of took over the lighter shade and just gave it a darker overall look. Now, when I colored the wrapper of the chocolate bar, the letters kind of got lost. So I took out my white jelly roll in size 5 and traced over the letters so you could still read them. For my campfire, I used Y00, Y02, Y15, YR04, and YR07. I don't typically use this many colors in such a small area, but I was really going for the varying shades of yellow and orange that are in flames, and I did what I could with it. I don't know that I super love the way I did it, but it's a learning experience. So if you have a better way to color flames, you do whatever way works best for you. When I got to the YRs, they looked a little bit harsh, so I did have to go back over them with the lighter shades a little bit to kind of blend them out more so it wasn't so stark of a contrast. For the bark of the logs underneath my fire, I am using E23, E25, and E29. For the shading on these, I am keeping it to the very bottom of both logs and just on the opposite side of the flames on that top log. I just felt like the top one would probably cast a shadow on the one underneath it. This might be wrong. I didn't look up any pictures for references, but ultimately when you lay your shadows down, don't really be afraid of incorrect placement. Most people aren't going to notice it. And if you're giving a card to someone and the only thing they can comment on is your shading, maybe they don't deserve a card. For the inner part of each log, I am using E31 and E35. I'm just doing a base coat of the lightest color, and then I'm going to do a couple little half circles or just tiny little rounded lines to make it look like the rings inside of the tree. Here are all my die cut pieces. I did stamp multiples of the marshmallows, the chocolate, and the graham crackers. I think I have 5 of each in total. I didn't end up using each one of them though. And now I am cutting down a piece of cardstock that measures 6 inch by 6 inch. I'm taking my Distress Oxide ink in chipped sapphire, and I'm going to ink blend just around the edges. I'm hoping to make the card look like the fire is radiating light from the center of the card, so the outside of the card would be slightly darker than the rest of it. So the chipped sapphire was giving it a nice look, but I didn't feel like it was quite dark enough. So I pull out my black soot Distress Oxide and I ink blend even less of the edges, just a little bit to darken up the very, very edges. I didn't want to bring that color in too much. Next, I take my Distress Oxide in chipped sapphire and I stamp the s'more randomly all over my panel. In the final card, you won't see all of this, and I knew that the center would be partially covered up, so when things got a little close to each other, I wasn't super concerned about it. It's tone on tone, it's not the main focus, and part of it will be covered up. Next, I pull out the little heart from this Holiday Helper stamp set from Lawn Fawn. You can use any little heart you have. This is just the smallest one I found first. So I'm going to stamp that in between the s'mores that I've already placed down, just to fill in a little bit more of the space. I plan on heat embossing my sentiment on this panel, so I'm allowing it some dry time. While I'm waiting for it to dry, I am going to cut out several different circles and rings using a set of nested circle dies. For this, I cut out 4 of the smaller size and I stacked them together using liquid adhesive. Sorry you guys, I don't have the measurements for each circle. It will vary depending on the images you're using, the size of card you want to make, but it's a fairly straightforward process once you learn how the mechanism works. Okay, here I'm taking acetate, and I found a slightly larger nested circle, and then a few size up from that. I'm going to tape them together on the acetate to create a ring. It needs to be clear so that you cannot see the ring behind my little stamped images. Once that's cut out, I'm also going to cut out a sheet of the blue paper, and I'm going to use a size that is bigger than both the stacked circles that I cut out and also the very center of the acetate circle. This will help keep the acetate circle in place. Here I'm just laying out my images. You can see kind of what I was going for when I started this whole card. The reason for the 4 stacked die cut circles in the center underneath the blue circle is to give the ring space to move around freely. Here I'm taking my little blue circle and I'm going to apply some Hero Arts Unicorn White pigment ink around the center of the circle. This will help with the illusion that the fire is radiating light. So it goes very light to the blue, to a little bit darker blue, into the black. Now here was my last minute decision to stamp a couple of the little sticks with the marshmallows on them. I stamped 3 here, but that's only because the first one I stamped didn't stamp as well as I like, so ignore that. I'm not going to use that one. For the branches, I'm using E23 and E25, and I love how I just call them branches. They're sticks, I guess. I mean, technically it's probably part of a branch, but branch makes me think of a much larger piece with more offshoots and possibly some leaves. I don't think that would be very good for roasting marshmallows. Since each stick is going to be placed a little bit differently, I'm not doing the shadows exactly the same on each one. For the roasted marshmallow color, I am going to use E50, E53, and E43, just to give it a kind of golden toasted look. I am keeping this primarily at the bottom of the marshmallow. It will look like it's just starting to get roasted. I toyed with the idea of adding some charred bits, as I know some people really like their marshmallows that way, and sometimes it's really hard to get that good golden marshmallow, but I really wasn't sure which colors to use, and I was afraid to mess up my images. It didn't take a whole long time to color each of these, but I was kind of ready to put my card together and see how it looked. What's your favorite way to eat marshmallows? Do you like them untoasted? Do you like them golden brown? Or do you like them with some char on them? I think I prefer mine just to be a little bit golden. I guess I should note that when I colored the little toasty bits of the marshmallows, I did kind of dot the marker instead of swipe it up. This just gave it a mottled look, which kind of happens when you roast marshmallows. After all my pieces have been cut, I am now going to assemble my card. The stacked die cuts I am going to glue with liquid glue in the center of my panel. I actually pulled out a ruler for this to try to make sure that the circle was as close to the center of the card as possible. I actually did a pretty good job of getting it in the center in the first place, which is shocking because I'm usually so bad at that, but it worked. Now I am going to heat emboss my sentiment. By this point, my ink has had enough time to dry so that I don't end up with stray embossing powder everywhere. The sentiment I'm using comes from the S'more the Merrier stamp set. I am going to stamp and heat emboss "We Go Together Like" at the top and "S'mores" at the bottom, and then on my circle I'm actually going to stamp the word "campfire." So my whole sentiment will read, "We go together like campfire and s'mores." For my heat embossing, I'm using Versamark clear ink and I'm using Ranger white embossing powder. When I heat emboss, I almost always use my Versamark ink, And if I'm using white embossing powder, it's almost always the Ranger white embossing powder, unless I need a detail powder. And then the one I have for that, I believe, is Hero Arts. Alright, here I'm just fixing the W a little bit. The embossing powder was in places it shouldn't have been, so I just pushed it away with my pokey tool. For my blue circle, I did heat set the circle, and I did this because the unicorn pigment ink takes a long time to dry. I guess all pigment inks take longer to dry. To get my sentiment curved, I used the die that I cut out the blue circle with, and I just set it on the door and curved the sentiment in the shape of the top of the circle. This worked really well. The only problem was my stamp was not placed exactly where I needed it to be, so I did have to scoot my circle around a little bit. To clean off the excess embossing powder, I use a Swiffer cloth. You do want to make sure that your heat emboss sentiments, or whatever you heat emboss, is actually cooled off before you go wipe it, because you can smudge it. Ask me how I know. To assemble this part of the card, I laid my acetate ring down around the stacked circles, and then I glued the blue circle over the stacked circles in the center. Learn from my mistakes here. What I should have done before I did this, I should have glued my sticks down to the circle before I glued my circle in place. This would have made it easier to trim around the edges of the circle to get the sticks to line up with the edge of the circle. I didn't do that, so I had to just make them shorter and then go in after it was already attached and trim around the edges a little bit better. It's not perfect, so like I said, learn from my mistakes. I'm attaching the campfire with some Big Mama foam tape. This is very thin foam tape. It's not as thick as most like 3M or whatever brand foam tapes you get. I wanted it to have just the slightest amount of dimension. I didn't need it to be super popped up off the card. I just wanted it to look like it was a little bit in front of the roasting marshmallows. You see me put glue on the back of one of the marshmallows and then rub it on the other one. I did this so that there was the proper amount of glue on each piece instead of having too much glue where it would ooze out and make my card front look like a mess. Here I'm laying out all of my marshmallows, graham crackers, and bars of chocolate. I'm only attaching the first one to the ring, and I'm just laying the other ones down to make sure that I don't end up with weird spacing or like 2 bags of marshmallows next to each other, because that's not what I want. After I am fine with the spacing, I am going to use double-sided adhesive. This is score tape, and I am going to start with the bags of marshmallows, attach them all down, and then I will move to the graham cracker boxes, and then finally the little bars of chocolate. I do this to keep the spacing where it needs to be. I also made sure that the score tape that I used was thin enough that it would not hang off of the acetate ring and stick to the card panel. If that happens, the little ring will not move anymore. This is a little bit tedious and time consuming, so if you do not like spending a lot of time doing this kind of thing, this might not be the card project for you. But for me, I honestly don't mind taking a long time to do something if the end result is something I'm happy with. And here you can see that it spins freely. I did that to make sure that nothing was stuck on accident. I don't have any square card bases, so I had to make one. And I took a 12 by 12 piece of paper and cut it at 6 inches and then scored it down the middle at the 6-inch mark. So this makes my card base. I chose a dark blue. You're not really going to see it except for the inside, and it is dark enough that when I have to write a sentiment in it, I will probably just use a white gel pen. You can also attach a piece of white cardstock in the middle of the card if you want on the inside, so that you have somewhere to write with a blue or black pen. But this didn't bother me. Now I am attaching the card panel onto my card base using that Big Mama foam tape, and before I try to attach it, I am also adding some liquid glue. This is just to help it not stick right away. It'll give it some wiggle room in case I don't get the placement right. But I did use my stamp positioner to line things up in the corner, so that really helped. Now my card is finished. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card. I will be back again with another video soon. Thank you all so much for watching.